When you think about Lake Tahoe before the pioneers moved west in the early 1800s, you really have to put yourself into a time of absolute pristine environmental conditions. First growth, ponderosa and sugar pines around the lake were everywhere. No automobile sounds, no plane sounds, just animals. There were no invasive species in the water of animal or plant. It was all natural. The waters were crystal clear. You could probably see 125 feet down into the bottom. It was a place where the Indians lived. The Washoe tribe came to spend their summers when it was too hot down in the Great Basin area. An environment that was just absolutely untouched and gorgeous.
The things that changed Tahoe Basin in between 1849, roughly 1830s to 1850s, 1860s, was the discovery of gold, obviously, in California. But more importantly for the Tahoe Basin was the discovery of silver in Virginia City. That discovery of gold, silver and gold as well, created a boom, if you will, in that area. Nevada is not well known for its lush forests. So the nearest area for wood and materials, raw materials, was the Tahoe Basin. And that alone is what changed Tahoe Basin. That started the lumber industry here in the area. The lumber industry, once it arrived here in the Tahoe Basin, it just clear-cut everything. Everything was clear-cut. Everything you see in Tahoe, on the mountains, everything was clear-cut except for a few small locations. Those locations known today as D.L. Bliss and Emerald Bay. Everything else you see around Tahoe was clear-cut in 1865, roughly that era.
The power that spearheaded the lumber industry in the Tahoe Basin was a gentleman named D.L. Bliss. At 16, in 1849, D.L. Bliss moved across from Massachusetts to the Tahoe, to the West Coast, and became basically a part of the economic explosion in the West. Later in life, in around 1871, he got involved with banking as a banker up in Virginia City. And as he saw the eastern slopes of the Sierra Nevadas being logged out for that mining, and the demand still very prevalent and increasing, he figured, we're going to go into the Tahoe Basin. So in the late 1800s, D.L. Bliss began to purchase lumber rights and logging rights up here in the Tahoe Basin. He realized, though, in the late 1800s, probably approaching 1880, 1890, that the logging industry was coming to a head here in the Tahoe Basin because they were running out of trees. There were certain areas that D.L. Bliss didn't want to log, and so the limitations of that commerce were coming to an end. And being as that they had their entire family here, they started to think, D.L. Bliss started to think, how can I diversify our business assets or our business interests here in Lake Tahoe?
How could he diversify in this area and do something else other than mining and lumber?
Well, they had some steamers, the Nevada, the Emerald, the Meteor. They were operating and towing logs around the lake. But he thought to himself, what a beautiful area to begin some sort of tourism. So in the late 1800s, he began to formulate his tourism plan. In 1893, he thought, what, if we have transportation, if we have lodging, and we have a place and a way to bring people up here, we could develop the Tahoe Basin as a tourist destination.
So in 1894, D.L. Bliss commissioned a vessel from San Francisco Iron Works. It was known as Hole Number 42. This hole was built in San Francisco, and it was trained over the Pacific Railroad all the way from San Francisco through Sacramento, through Reno, and then down to Carson City. Once in Carson City, the majority of the parts were then hauled from Carson City over to Glenbrook Bay, where it was put on a ways system. A ways system is where you build ships and you can actually roll the ship into the water and sort of launch the vessel. So in 1896, it was completed. August 24th, 1896. It was rolled out onto the waters of Lake Tahoe.
The SS Tahoe, Queen of the Lake, Steamer Tahoe, she made a counterclockwise rotation around Lake Tahoe every day. From 1896 until 1930, 1932. There's no real specific end date, but what caused her to stop being productive and useful was the fact that in around 1931, 1932, the lake around the lake was completed, and transportation around the lake was a little faster, a little more efficient than it was via the Tahoe. So you have to remember the Tahoe made 7 or 8 stops as she went around the lake. And so getting from Tahoe City to Camp Richardson, it might have taken a half a day, whereas via trailer, horse, vehicle, might have only taken a couple of hours. But what the Tahoe did was transport wealth, people, excitement into the Tahoe Basin. There was a rail spur that was built from Truckee to the Tahoe City Railroad Pier. That pier was 1,000 feet long. That pier was 951 feet long, and at the end it had a special mooring for the SS Tahoe. That 3/4 gauge rail transported freight people right out onto the pier, where they stopped the train, people got off, and got onto the SS Tahoe for their trip to destinations unknown around Tahoe. It also carried the mail for the U.S. Postal Service. The Tahoe existed primarily in the early 1930s as a result of its mail contract, because tourism was kind of waning as a method of needing to be transported. People were able to get around the lake without the Tahoe, and the tourism was building on its own, coming in from Sacramento, coming in from Southern California. And then a faster ship, the Marion B, came along, and it won the mail contract over the SS Tahoe. At that point, the SS Tahoe was really no longer needed. It couldn't financially support itself. There is not an inch of Tahoe's history, even in present day, that wasn't touched by the work and the efforts of the SS Tahoe. She was truly the cornerstone of what some say created the economics of the Tahoe Basin in present day. Some aren't happy about that, but it's the fact. The SS Tahoe brought tourism to Lake Tahoe. The tourism master plan that D.L. Bliss put into place in 1894 was the absolute pivoting point of the economy in the Tahoe Basin today. He may not have realized how important his decision was to become, but once that process was put in motion, the SS Tahoe, the Tahoe Tavern, the 951-foot rail pier in Tahoe City, in 1900, 1901, when all those began full swing operation, tourism and business and commerce began to build in full force at that point in history. But this maritime history, this maritime activity in Tahoe wasn't to last. The road around the lake was completed in around 1931 to 32 by historical documentation from the Nevada Department of Transportation. In 1934, the SS Tahoe pretty much lost the mail contract to the Marion B, another more efficient and speedy steamer. The Marion B was able to get mail around the lake much faster. And at that point, people were getting around the lake via car, via wagon, via horse, and the Tahoe was just not needed. So she was towed over to Tahoe City and stuck on a mooring buoy in around 1935, and there she sat until August 29th, 1940.
The SS Tahoe was first powered by a wood fire boiler, and later in the 1920s converted to an oil burner. The SS Tahoe was operated with 2 props with 1,200 horsepower, and she could move at about 18 knots. The SS Tahoe was built unlike other vessels at the time. She was built with a lot of decoration to her. Teak was predominantly the wood used on it. It had an ornate glass to it, brass throughout. It was built for luxury, not for utilitarian purposes.
The steamers, the Nevada, the Meteor, and the SS Tahoe, were all floating over in Tahoe City on their moorings. They were deteriorating, they were getting vandalized. And William Seth Bliss, the son of D.L. Bliss, didn't really want to see the fate of these glorious steamships end up to be like the Emerald. The Emerald was an earlier steamer and wasn't owned by the Bliss family. That was actually hauled out of the lake, cut up for scrap, and sold for the steel that was needed, the iron that was needed. The Bliss family, William Seth Bliss, he decided to give all these ships a just burial at sea, basically. And one by one, he took them out and he scuttled them. First the Nevada, then the Meteor. But when he decided to scuttle the SS Tahoe, he really didn't want to just drop her, the queen of the lake, at the bottom of the lake where nobody could see it. His intention was to have the SS Tahoe scuttled in 100 feet of water where people could go out and see it from a glass-bottom boat. When news of the scuttling of the SS Tahoe got out around the Tahoe Basin, there was huge public outcry. But there really wasn't any groups organized to take on the financial responsibilities of keeping her afloat, keeping her protected. So William Seth Bliss hired Captain Lloyd Saxon. Lloyd Saxon owned a little tugboat called the Quitchakidden. And the Quitchakidden worked around the lake in various capacities, and he was hired to come up on August 29th to Tahoe City from Camp Richardson, where he and his family lived, and on August 30th tow out the SS Tahoe to Glenbrook Bay and scuttle her. Now here's where the story gets real exciting. Because of the public outcry, there was a tremendous amount of protest about scuttling the SS Tahoe. And on August 29th, when Captain Lloyd Saxon, his wife, and 3 children arrived in Tahoe City at the 951-foot pier to hook up the SS Tahoe the next day and tow her out, William Seth Bliss met them at the pier and said, "I realize it's 5 o'clock at night. Maybe it was 6, maybe it was 4:30 in the afternoon. Nobody knows exactly, but we're towing her out tonight." Imagine the look on Captain Lloyd Saxon's face when he realized that he was going to tow a 170-foot ship, 175 tons, out to Glenbrook Bay behind his little 35-foot tug and end up in Glenbrook Bay in the middle of the night. But those were the instructions from William Seth Bliss. Captain Lloyd Saxon and Captain Ham of the SS Tahoe honored that decision, hooked up the SS Tahoe, and began to tow her from Tahoe City into Glenbrook Bay. It took some 3 to 4 hours to tow the SS Tahoe over into Glenbrook from Tahoe City. Towed the SS Tahoe out basically a day early to scuttle her over in Glenbrook Bay. The interesting thing was that William Seth Bliss, he didn't even share this with his family. He didn't even tell his family that they had scuttled the SS Tahoe until the very next day. It just must have been a very emotional decision for William Seth Bliss to do such a thing, because it was a major part of the Bliss family in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. In honoring his father, he realized that it would be the most loyal thing to do would be to give the SS Tahoe a proper burial at sea. Here we are, 3 a.m. in the morning in Glenbrook Bay. It's pitch black. The SS Tahoe is full of water and sinking. Bow up, and in a flood of bubbles, the bow submerged. And it was never seen until 1963, when a local gaming businessman, Bill Hara, went out and found it with a self-made underwater closed-circuit camera. Once it left the surface, we were left to a wondering of what actually happened. Why is it in 400 feet of water? New Millennium Dive Expeditions a nonprofit research group out of Reno, Nevada, formed this organization to do just that, to explore and research the SS Tahoe. Turns out that once the SS Tahoe submerged, it fell some 165 feet through the water column before it hit the bottom in 335 feet of water. At that point, the ship, by some unknown intervening fate, slowly fell to the bottom, resting upon its keel. But it fell in such a way and sitting on such a slope that the weight of the ship sitting on its keel allowed itself to slide. And the SS Tahoe, once it hit and laid down on the bottom, slid some 200 feet to its resting point today, where her bow is in 360 feet of water and her stern is in 470 feet of water. The interesting thing about the position of the stern is that it's some 10 to 12 feet embedded in the sandy slope. So as gravity took place, as gravity affected the sliding of the SS Tahoe, it dug itself in, and the buildup of dirt and soil behind the keel of the SS Tahoe stopped her at her present position. Now, where she hit in 335 feet of water is a debris field. And that debris has to be all the superstructure that is no longer present on her today.